Hello friends, welcome. Here we are discussing real stories told by real people. Today we have a story about a man who wondered why his wife spends so much time with her daughter's family. Let's see what happens. My name is Trevor, and I'm 39 years old. My life seemed quite prosperous. My wife, Susan, and I have been together since school. She has always been my reliable companion. We got married at an early age, and a few years later we had a daughter, Lila. She was our miracle, our only child, whom we loved madly. Susan was a beautiful woman with brown hair and bright blue eyes. She worked as a teacher at a local school and often claimed to know how best to raise our daughter. Her professionalism in the field of pedagogy gave her confidence in her rightness. Lila, in turn, inherited her mother's beauty and vivacity. She was an intelligent and talented girl, but very spoiled. One evening, when I returned from work, I noticed that Susan and Lila were acting strangely. Susan was cooking dinner, and Lila was sitting at the kitchen table with her textbooks. I went up to them and kissed Susan on the cheek. "How was your day?" I asked, trying to hide the wariness in my voice. "It's okay, Trevor," she replied without looking up from the stove. "Lila is preparing for exams. How are you?" "That's good too," I said, looking over at Lila, who seemed too focused on her studies. "How are you, Lila?" "It's okay, Dad," she replied without looking up. "I teach a lot, you know." I felt that something was wrong, but I didn't want to bring up the subject right away. We sat down to dinner, and I noticed Susan constantly exchanging glances with Lila. It was unusual, and I decided that I was just being paranoid. The next day, I returned home a little earlier than usual. I thought I would surprise my girls and spend time with them. But when I opened the door, I was greeted by a strange silence. Lila was in class, and Susan was supposed to be at home. "Susan, are you at home?" I called loudly as I walked into the living room. There was no response. I went further into the house and heard strange noises from our bedroom. Going up the stairs, I opened the door and saw Susan. She was standing at the mirror in her underwear and clearly did not expect to see me. "Oh, Trevor, you're early," she said, trying not to show embarrassment. "I was just changing after a shower." "It's all right," I replied, trying not to show my surprise. "I wanted to surprise you and spend the evening together." "That's fine," she replied, coming up to me and hugging me. "Let's have dinner together." We went downstairs and I noticed that Susan looked tense all the time. I decided not to bring up the subject, but anxiety began to flare up inside me. I felt that something was hiding behind this mask of an ordinary family life. That evening, when Lila returned home, the three of us had dinner. Susan tried to be cheerful, but her behavior betrayed nervousness. Lila also seemed too silent. We were sitting in the living room when I decided to ask a question that had been hanging in the air for a long time. "Susan, why do you go to Lila's apartment so often? You say you're helping her, but she's already an adult." "Trevor, this is our baby," she replied, almost raising her voice. "She needs our support. I understand, but it seems to me that you go there too often. Maybe Lila needs more independence. You just don't understand how hard it is to be an only child," she said, getting up and going into the kitchen. I was left alone with my thoughts, realizing that these conversations do not lead to anything good. The internal tension was building up, and I didn't know what was ahead of us. It's been a few weeks since the night I first noticed the oddities in Susan's behavior. I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was going wrong. There were small cracks in our family, and it bothered me. Susan began to visit Lila even more often. She justified herself by saying that she was helping her cope with the responsibilities of a young mother. Lila, in turn, rarely came home, explaining that she was busy at college and taking care of the child. It seemed that our family ties were gradually weakening. One day, when I returned home earlier than usual, I noticed that Susan was missing again. Deciding to take advantage of the moment, I went to Lila. When I drove up to her apartment, I was seized with a strange anxiety. I knocked on the door. A few seconds later, Aiden opened it. He looked surprised and a little nervous. "Trevor, what are you doing here?" "What is it?" he asked, clearly not expecting my visit. "Hi, Aiden. I just decided to come by and check on Lila and my granddaughter," I replied, trying not to show my concern. "May I come in?" Of course, he said, stepping aside. "Lila is not at home right now. She is in the clinic with her child." When I entered the apartment, a strange silence caught my attention. I went into the living room and heard the sound of running water from the bathroom. At that moment, the bathroom door opened and Susan came out. She was wearing only a towel, and her face froze in surprise when she saw me. "Trevor! Why are you here?" she muttered, unable to hide her shock. "I wanted to spend time with Lila and my granddaughter." "What are you doing here?" "You're supposed to be at work," I said, trying to keep my suspicions at bay. I took the day off to help Lila. We agreed that I would look after the child while she was in the clinic," Susan replied, smiling unconvincingly. Aiden stood to the side, nervously shifting from one foot to the other. I could feel the tension building in the room. "Okay, maybe I really should have called before the visit," I said, trying not to betray my disbelief. "Let's have some coffee, shall we?" "Of course, Trevor," Susan replied, still holding the towel. We sat down at the kitchen table. Susan started making coffee, and I tried to hide my thoughts. The conversation was strained, and I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was being hidden. That evening, when I returned home, I felt depressed. Susan behaved strangely for the rest of the evening, as if she was trying to compensate for something. She was constantly hugging me and paying more attention than usual. "How was your day, Trevor?" "What is it?" she asked as we sat at dinner. "An ordinary day," I replied, not wanting to go into details. "Susan, are you sure Lila is okay?" "Of course, darling. Everything is fine," she said, trying to look calm. "You're just worried about her. It's okay." "Maybe," I agreed, but anxiety was building inside me. These strange moments continued to accumulate. I began to notice that Susan often receives messages on her phone and tries to hide them quickly. I felt that her explanations were not always sincere. My inner anxiety was growing, and I didn't know what to do next. Several weeks passed, and my suspicions did not leave me. Susan continued to act strangely, and I couldn't ignore my guesses anymore. I needed to know the truth. One evening, when Susan fell asleep, I decided to check her phone. My heart was pounding in my chest when I picked up her cell phone. There was a stream of messages from Aiden in his memory. What I read there left me speechless. They exchanged love confessions, discussed meetings, and even talked about how to hide their relationship from Lila and me. I sat in the dark, feeling the ground give way under my feet. I needed to act immediately. I woke Susan up. "Susan, wake up," I said, shaking her shoulder. "Trevor, what happened?" she muttered, rubbing her eyes. "Explain it." I handed her a phone with open messages. Her face turned pale, and her eyes widened in horror. She realized that it was useless to deny it. "It's not what you think," she began. But I interrupted her. "Not what I think it is. This is treason, Susan. You betrayed me and our family," I exclaimed, barely able to contain my anger. I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "When did it start?" I asked, trying to speak calmly, but my voice betrayed my inattention. "A few months ago," she admitted, lowering her head. "I felt lonely. You were busy at work all the time. I didn't know how else to cope." I couldn't believe my ears. Susan, my faithful life partner, found solace in the arms of our daughter's young boyfriend. "You've ruined everything," I said, feeling anger turn to devastation. I have to talk to Leela. Susan grabbed my arm. Trevor, please don't. She already knows, Susan, I said, pulling away. She knew and was silent. I hurried to Leela. When I knocked on her door, she opened it instantly. Her face was tear-stained, and her eyes were red from crying. Dad, I'm so sorry, she began, but I interrupted her. Did you know all this time? I asked, feeling the anger rising in me again. Yes, I knew, she admitted, lowering her head. Mom made me keep quiet. She said you couldn't handle it, that the family would collapse. Leela, you should have told me, I said, trying to understand her point of view. We could do something, find a way out. I was afraid, Dad. I was afraid of losing you both, she said, sobbing. We have to deal with this, I said, hugging her. We have to find a way to move on. I returned home feeling that our life would never be the same. Susan was standing in the living room, waiting for me to return. I looked at her and realized that this marriage could not continue. I'm going to file for divorce, I said, looking her straight in the eye. And you have to leave. She nodded without arguing. Susan packed up her things and left the house. I was left alone, but I knew that this was only the beginning of a long road to recovery. Leela tried to contact me, but I couldn't talk to her. I felt betrayed not only by my wife, but also by my daughter. My heart was broken, and I didn't know how to put it back together. It's been 4 months since Susan left. Life gradually improved, although the pain of betrayal has not subsided yet. Decided to start with a clean slate. I had the resources and time to focus on my career and personal interests. I sold the house I lived in with Susan and Leela and moved into a new apartment on the other side of town. The apartment was spacious and bright, with a view of the park. This place became my refuge, where I could start over. One evening, after a long day at work, I was sitting on the balcony with a cup of coffee, enjoying the silence. My phone rang. Leela's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a long time to answer, but finally accepted the challenge. Hi, Dad, her voice sounded, filled with anxiety and hope. Hi, Leela, I replied, trying not to show my emotions. How are you? I miss you, Dad. I realize I've made a lot of mistakes. Her voice was trembling. But I need your help. I took a deep breath. My relationship with Leela has been strained since everything came out. But she was still my daughter, and I couldn't reject her. Leela, I miss you too. But you have to understand that everything that happened was very painful for me, I said, trying to speak softly. I know, Dad, she sobbed. But I need you to help me figure this out. I can't do it alone. Mom left too. I was left all alone. Where are you now? I asked, feeling my heart constrict at her words. I'm still in the apartment. Aiden's gone, and I can't pay the rent alone, she confessed. Leela, I'll help you. But we need to talk in person, I said, determined to restore our relationship. We agreed to meet at the park the next day. When I arrived, Leela was already sitting on the bench, nervously pulling at her long blonde hair. She looked tired, but there was hope in her eyes. Hi, Dad, she said, getting up and hugging me. Hi, Leela, I replied, feeling the pain gradually go away, giving way to warmth. We sat down on a bench and were silent for a long time. Finally, I spoke. Leela, I want you to know that I will always be there for you. But we need to sort out our problems. You have to be honest with me and with yourself, I said, looking into her eyes. I understand, Dad, she replied, nodding. I am ready to work on myself and on our relationship. I just didn't know how to explain it to you. Let's start small, I suggested. I will help you with the rent, and we will meet regularly to talk and restore trust. Thanks, Dad, she said, hugging me even tighter. I'm so glad you didn't turn your back on me. We spent the whole evening walking around the park and discussing everything that happened. Leela told me about her feelings, fears, and doubts. I listened to her, trying to understand and support her. When I returned home, I felt that we had taken the first step towards restoring our relationship. I still had a lot of work to do on myself and on learning to trust again. But I was ready for this. Life went on, and I knew that there were still many trials ahead of us. But now I was sure that we could handle them together as a family. So we have come to the end of this story. Please write your opinion in the comments. We will be interested to know it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you don't miss new, even more exciting stories. We wish you good luck.